Hello and welcome to Pricing College with your hosts Aidan Campbell
and Joanna Wells.
In today's episode, we want to talk about a pricing story that has made the news, I guess, the mainstream news media, which is not that common in the world of pricing. And that is related to dynamic pricing for concert tickets. More specifically, Bruce Springsteen tickets on I think it's a national US tour, and the concept that pricing for those tickets has a dynamic element.
Yeah, dynamic pricing has some controversy around it because people don't like that there are prices, there's a range of prices, and they don't like that the price is not fixed. People feel there's a lack of transparency when there's more than one price, and more than one price in one segment, and more than one price for one product. So we thought this particular story was quite interesting, not only because of the controversy around dynamic pricing as a methodology in pricing, but also how it's being introduced formally within within the music industry. When there's a lot of people out there that go there thinking of the music, the art form, they think about their favourite artists, and they think that there's going to be some kind of, that transparency reflected in the price point because, they go in there for the love of the music. And now they're finding actually, the artist is very little say around it. It's very commercialised. It's a business enterprise. There's no, you don't get rewarded for being a fan. In fact, now you're getting penalised and paying higher prices for being a fan.
I think, music and certainly pop stars and rock stars and stuff like that, there is a fan, certainly the fan element. That's how they get to where they are. Clearly, like Bruce Springsteen at the beginning, he started off, he probably toured small halls. I'm assuming this, and he built up a fan base, and those are loyal followers, etc. Admittedly, they probably got in there and bought their tickets early, I'm guessing. But, some of the points we'd like to make on this dynamic pricing, it's not as if dynamic pricing has not always applied to tickets. Clearly, the second-hand market, ticket touts, scalpers, fundamentally they have operated the ultimate dynamic pricing model where they stand outside the concert hall and try to, shift tickets, leftover tickets, or to anybody willing to pay, and they will fundamentally charge that price. So, that has probably what Ticketmaster here is doing, who is the agency selling the tickets, is internalizing that and giving them to, using that willingness to pay. I suppose the old flat pricing model basically left all that extra profit on the table. They could have gone to the artist and the promoters who are putting cash behind the enterprise, and it was going to ticket touts basically who were filling that gap. Clearly, there are people the day before, the week before, who will pay significantly more for these tickets, whether rich people, whether super fans, whether even the sort of people in casinos when Elvis used to play in Vegas, and you'd have high rollers would obviously get free tickets to those big events and big sports games, etc. So it's nothing new under the sun. It's probably, to some extent, it's a smart move, I think. You're internalizing it as long as, you're segmenting it. It's not all tickets. And I think some of the stats we saw, or at least, because Ticketmaster were forced into defending themselves to some extent, and some of the stats that they did give were that 88% of tickets were sold at set prices below $400 before taxes and fees. So let's be honest, that still is a hell of a lot of money, $400 American dollars, with the average price paid for the tickets of $200. So that left roughly 12% of tickets in the market for dynamic pricing.
Yeah, I think here the controversy is more around how they're almost holding seats and tickets for profitability, simply for profit. It's actually, and not just a little bit of profit, quite a huge amount. If you go from a fixed price of, say, $200 per ticket US to something like $5,000, that's a huge leap in the price relativity price point. So that's number one, and that's all being pocketed through, the ticket agencies and the artists. And I think, fans have a right to ask, where is that money going? Is that fair? I think this interests me because generally dynamic pricing is explained by businesses as something to utilize and balance supply and stock. But here we can see quite simply that stock and being the seats are being kept back to push huge amounts of profit for the artists and the industry. So I find that's an interesting point. Generally speaking, businesses don't really discuss willingness to pay. Again, another interesting point that's been introduced with the concept of dynamic pricing. As I said before, generally it's capacity utilization that's pushed, not willingness to pay. So here we're seeing how you can you're putting two concepts, pricing concepts together. Dynamic pricing and willingness to pay. Now, you can't get confused. They are very different concepts. And you've got to be careful how you use them, because if you start putting them together, you start thinking, okay, dynamic pricing is going to exploit our willingness to pay. And why are we willing to pay for our tickets? Because we really highly value the artists. We fear not seeing them if we can't get to see them. So we're being exploited here, and to some degree through loss aversion theory, and that's pushing up the ticket prices and our willingness to pay. Then on top of that, we're hearing that the businesses are making huge amounts of profit consciously to do so. So this is why it really is in the media, and it really should be explained, because if you see a price point of $200 and then $5,000, you kind of want to know where your money's going.
I think, the music industry is clearly the demographics, certainly of the United States and most of the world, are changing. When a lot of these acts started out, it was concerts where kids would go to concerts fundamentally. It was teenagers or young adults would go to concerts, and then they'd use that to buy records, and the records was where the money came from. Obviously, with the complete change of the industry, it's almost like music is given as a freemium, through Spotify or streaming or whatever it is, and very few people really buy records, and then the real money comes from the concerts. And to a large extent, these acts that we're talking about are, to some extent, the baby boom acts who have very wealthy older people following them. I don't know. And again, this could be just prejudging or whatever, but I'd assume a large amount of the population going to Bruce Springsteen will be older. I think Joanna touched on the concept there of gouging. Is this gouging? It's a grey area. One thing some of the articles we read suggested that Springsteen's getting old. The band, the E Street Band, are getting old. And so some people think this could be a last hurrah. This could be the last opportunity to see this band. And maybe some people have it on their bucket list or a dream to see Bruce Springsteen. Clearly the last 2-3 years have been very, people feel also they've been, excluded or kept away from entertainments and stuff like that. So there's probably pent-up demand also for people. So, in that, it can't be gouging because nobody needs to see a concert. Let's be honest about this. It's not like selling, a bottle of water or something to someone, in a famine, or food to somebody in a famine. It's not to that extent. But it is a grey area whereby, to some extent, it's pushing into the area of, will people have a bad taste in their mouth at the end of this? Will they look back and go, I would, your view on the, and realistically, the view will not be on Ticketmaster. The view will be on Bruce Springsteen, I would argue, and maybe at concerts even in general. There could be a negative, which I always think the definition of gouging is when, after the experience, you're committed never to deal with that seller ever again. And there could be, I would argue, in pop music and rock music, where you need affinity, you need loyalty, you need, it's not, in some cases it is love, but you need a real affinity towards the act. It's not just about the music, it's about the lifestyle, the culture, the movement almost, what it represents to you. And if you're an artist and you're selling, you really need to make sure you're segmenting that market, because if you burn your base, if you burn your core, your career is not going to last too long.
I think another interesting point here is that how pricing is being used to influence and direct behaviours. Here you've got, quite a clear price cycle. They've kept the tickets low at the beginning of this price cycle to entice people to go to the concert, to drive traffic to the concert at a fairly, as Aidan said, it's not a low price point, it's still $400, but it's manageable price point, so that I suppose the fans can go. So you learn, all right, at the beginning of the price cycle for ticket pricing, get your tickets early, because you really will be paying so much more towards the end, maybe 2 weeks after the first launch of the first price tickets. And then obviously, they're almost training people to do that, like buy quickly, and also they're training people to accept extremely high prices for being late in the cycle. So you didn't get your tickets early, so it's actually your accountability for that. So therefore you have to pay more, and not just 2 times more, 3, 4, 5 times more for the price. And really we can charge that, and you can't ask questions. It's kind of the conversation that's going on here. So the onus is completely on us. And what is interesting is how a price point can influence huge amounts of people all at once to do just 1 or 2 things, and how an industry in itself can change by a price point. The music industry is changing pretty much because of Spotify has changed the dynamics of that industry, but now it's all going through to gigs, live music, but it's that price point that really is changing how people buy, which I find interesting. And Ticket Tech is really experimenting, has been for quite a few years now, some interesting approaches. And now I really do see them bringing that dynamic pricing and willingness to pay to the forefront here. Before it was behind the scenes, and now they're really trying to push that one.
I suppose the final point I'll make on this, I could be completely wrong, but I think some of it reflects on changes in society. I think entertainments, a lot of things used to be much more egalitarian. Certainly after World War II, the whole world went towards, at least the Western world, went to much more of an egalitarian system, welfare state. Football was, the everyman sport. Pop concerts were affordable luxuries, but certainly affordable for kids and that sort of thing. They weren't break the bank sort of things. I think we're going back to more of a golden age, almost, fin de siècle sort of concept, where the super rich are. It's fine now to discriminate. It's fine now to say this is for the rich. This is for the. I'm not making a value judgment on that. I'm just pointing out what I see, and I'm seeing this happening more and more, whereby price is being used as a method to discriminate against and exclude people from who can't afford it. And the luxuries are there for the rich. And, I think you'll see it I think conspicuous wealth is being pushed probably more now than certainly maybe, the 80s is famous for conspicuous wealth, and, the yuppies and the Reagan Thatcher years, of course. But I think if you go back to, the youth movements, the 60s, the 70s, I'll tell you, if you try to put on a dynamic pricing model at Woodstock, I'm not really sure what would happen. So I think a lot of it is, the market and the time and the age that we're in, accounts for a lot of things. It's not a one-way movement. It goes both ways. And I just think we are now in this, it is a discriminatory basis, and it's discrimination on money and wealth and sophistication or whatever else you want to talk about. But this is, I would argue, this is a sign of it.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point in itself. I mean, you can see that from the channels to market. You've got TikTok, you've got Netflix, YouTube, Spotify, which is all for the masses. It's cheap, it's accessible. Yeah, you get all the options that you want. However, it's not real life. And really, that's where the low price point is. You're not joining real life. You're watching it vicariously through a screen and all of that sort of stuff. However, if you want to experience the real thing, the real deal, then you're in that very small segment now, and you have to pay. And it's not just, it's maybe 800 times the normal, X the price. more just to be a part of the real world now. So this is quite a, the virtual reality versus real world scenario, and the price points that reflect that is a really interesting and mind-bending thought, and it fills you sort of with a mix of feelings, and I suppose there's quite a lot to unpack in and of itself. But I think from this particular article, it's brought about new price leadership in a way. It's psychological pricing, and it's the division between business and customers, but almost through an alignment of value drivers. Yes, there's an understanding of value drivers, but also how you use that information when you set prices, and how you use different channels and how you price those channels. Because if you see here clearly, if you see music as through Spotify and in real life in an arena, then you can see the price point is hugely different. Now, in any other business, if it's done in retail, you'd say, is that fair? But here, clearly, people are saying it's completely fair. How come it's not fair in other industries?
My final point on this one, I think it is fair. It's just you have to be aware when you're selling what it says and what it creates and the atmosphere it makes. I give the example of Wimbledon, the tennis contest, and look, it's probably one of the most segmented markets, I'd assume. You've got the royal family, you've got the Tom Cruises of this world, etc., in the royal box. But then you also have I think it's a queuing system they operate every day where people queue up and buy tickets. Because clearly when you've got excess demand for a product, you either discriminate based on price or you use the Soviet queuing system. But with the queuing system, it gives people an impression that everyone can afford it, that everyone can be part of it, that you're not. It's not completely outside the realms of you getting it, and so you have to really consider not just the money, but what it means to your base and the longer term impacts of stuff. But I think that's obviously more psychological and for a later podcast. So I'll leave it there today.
I think my last point on this is that Ticketek has done this over a number of years. It's not something they've just brought upon their customer base. As I say, they're training their customers, and I think if you think listening to this podcast from different industries, think about that, how you can understand what your customers value, and then think about your business strategy and see how you can align it, because that alignment doesn't occur overnight. And even today, we've got 90%. With Ticketek in this instance, 90% of the tickets were at fixed price, and they've only introduced about 9% of being dynamic pricing. So I wouldn't say it's 100% wholly accepted even within the music industry, but let's have a look. Is that percentage going to grow in terms of dynamic pricings versus fixed pricing in the music industry? I would say it probably is, but there'll be a balance. And what we can see is Ticketek is definitely trying to find that balance.
Like, I try to keep the spirit of the 60s alive, so I'm just going to jump the fence and not pay anything. Okay, we'll leave it there today. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Bye.